what do shoes really look like? This is key to running quickly or efficiently. First of all, to run fast, it's useful to have a very light shoe. We all know that. We all look for shoes that are lightweight, so weight's not going to help. Probably more important for how you run is having a geometry underfoot which is appropriate. A steep road grade is 6 to 8%. Where we live in the United States, in Boulder, Colorado, we have very big hills, up to 30 kilometers at a shot with no dip. So we can climb from about 5,000 feet to close to 14,000 feet. Actually, in some cases, over 14,000 feet on a single road. It just goes up and up and up. But they rarely build the roads more than about 10% because it's too steep for vehicles to go up or down them successfully. They'll overheat going up or they'll burn their brakes out coming down. So, needless to say, this is a fairly steep hill. And you know yourself, if you see a profile in a race, especially a longer race like an Ironman, and you see some 6 or 8% grades in there, you're starting to think, oh, I'm going to need to do some hill training because that's steep. And it is. But shoes have an even steeper gradient, probably steeper than any hill you're going to run on. And it's fairly common to see grades of 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15%. At 15%, I don't think I've ever seen a road built at 15%. I'm sure they're out there somewhere. But that is so steep that at that point, it's almost getting ridiculous. But we see shoes like this. They're actually getting worse when you start to see I think it's the Kayano 16 or 17 now, that shoe's getting even bigger in the heel. Racing flats also fool people because they're not flat. Racing flats are not flat at all. Originally they were, a long time ago, racing flats were actually flat, but today you don't see flat racing flats. You typically see racing not quite so flats. And this is Chrissy's shoe from 2007. Quite a decent shoe, nice and level-ish. Not too bad. It has a close to a 9% gradient underfoot. Interestingly, it turns out that about 3.3% is where you start to see the shoe interfere with your gait as you start to run. So if you walk quicker and quicker and quicker until eventually you have to break into a slow jog, you're probably running at about 6 kilometers an hour, and at that speed, about a 3% gradient won't interfere. But over that to about 4%, they'll start to interfere with your gait at a slow speed. As you run faster, you get further and further forward, so the bigger heels don't matter so much. And this shoe up here, the Adidas Adios Adizero, Adizero Adios is the shoe worn to the current marathon world record, 2:03:59. Of course, at that speed, they're running, I'm not sure what it is in kilometers, but it's about less than 540 miles, so very, very, very fast. And of course, he's not getting anywhere close to his heel, but he's also robbing himself a little bit of his own elasticity and free energy and carrying a little excess weight. Nike Free, quite a good shoe in many respects, but also with a very big heel wedge. I was fortunate to work on the Free program at Nike, so I kind of have some inside track on it. The designer for that shoe is quite frustrated because he didn't get everything he wanted in the shoe, and it's very well known in the shoe industry and has been for a very long time that normal running shoes, regular running shoes, weaken your feet. So the more shoe you have on your foot, the weaker it's going to be. It basically deconditions your feet. And the smart guys in the Nike running lab decided that they were trying to address this by building what they were calling at the time, and this is back in the early 2000s, they were calling it a barefoot shoe, which was interesting because it's kind of come full circle for them. And the reason they're frustrated is they got some of their design into the shoe, and the thing that they did manage to address was weakening of the forefoot. So if you wear a Nike Free, which is heavily articulated in the forefoot, most of you are familiar with the shoe. It's got a very, very flexible shoe. It does help recondition a weakened foot. Won't do anything if you already have a strong foot, but if your foot has been weakened by being in a traditional cushioned shoe, it'll help strengthen it. This allows a lot more mobility in the front. A lot of people who run in this shoe find it a little bit uncomfortable to start with because it's quite thin, especially right in the forefoot. It's a very thin shoe in the forefoot, but it does make your forefoot work. So from that perspective, it works quite well. Still has a big heel, so not quite so good. There's all sorts of level shoes around. Here's a list of some of them. Innovate, based out of Britain, has some very, very good shoes. I believe they're originally designed for fell running. So fell runners need to be able to feel the ground. And so it's protection for your foot, but allows you to feel the ground quite effectively. So some of these shoes, the NR Chi, it's not yet released, but it's a shoe for chi running. Anyone know chi running? If you've heard of chi running, I'm not sure how pervasive it is here, but it's a form of running. It's a running style that is very protective. It's not particularly fast running style, but it allows you to run very long distances, very well protected. Some of the other shoes, Terraplana, Innovate, New Balance, Minimus coming out this year, Merrill Barefoot also coming out this year. And these are all minimal shoes. They're very much like the Vibram 5 fingers, but they don't have 5 fingers or toes. Actually, I think one of the Merrills might. Essentially, it's a very, very thin piece of rubber between you and the ground on all of these shoes. And that has its advantages as well. The advantages of having less under your foot means that you have better afferent feedback, which means that you intuitively protect yourself. And a good example of afferent feedback is if you decided, or someone got you really drunk and they were having you run across some hot coals or a fire, even though you're a little inebriated, you'd probably still do the right thing, which is you'd want to protect yourself from the hot ground. So you'd line yourself up and you'd get in a flex position, and then you'd lift your feet up really fast and high, and you'd try and touch the ground as little as possible. So effectively, you're protecting yourself through afferent feedback and knowing that you're going to protect yourself from the ground. And these very minimal shoes do exactly that. Has anyone run in a Vibram or any other very minimal shoe? And you probably find, oh good crowd. So you'll probably find that you don't load your heel up as much because you're protecting your own heel. And you may even have found that the back of your leg got quite sore to start with. You find that? Yeah, so to start with, when you're conditioning to run in that style, you're changing your running form, and it's all self-regulated. You could do something similar. They actually found that texture under your foot does this. So if you took your sock liner out and you put some very rough sandpaper inside your shoe facing up so it touches your foot, you'd probably start doing the same thing because you can feel it on your feet. It's just kind of a feeling thing. Unfortunately, what happens if you have a big cushion shoe, paradoxically, at least on the outset, it actually makes you hit the ground harder. So force plate measurements in gait running labs, they have you run across a 3-axis force plate, so it measures all the axes of force. And if you put someone across a force plate and have them run with no shoes at all, that will be the lightest they will run. That will be the least impact, by a factor of about 2 actually, compared to a big running shoe. So a big, bulky, traditional running shoe will make you hit the ground twice as hard. Seems like a paradox. Reason is you can't feel the ground, so you're not self-regulating, and you're probably heel striking, and that's why you hit it so hard. Does that make sense to everyone? It can take a while to get your head around it, but it's pretty much what happens. So the less shoe you have, typically, the lighter you're going to run, and most of that impact comes from your inbuilt suspension. You have an enormous amount of suspension in your legs. For most people, it's upwards of got to convert. I'm rusty with my metrics. It's a couple of feet. If you're really tall, it could be 3 feet. So there's a couple of feet of suspension. Shoes, on the other hand, only have a little bit. So even the best shoes only have a tiny bit of cushioning. But that cushioning can be extremely useful, and it's mainly for the fine structure in your feet. Regardless, there's shoes that do all sorts of things. Less shoe, less impact. But it won't help you run faster. If you want to talk about speed, there's something else that comes into play, and that's efficiency. So barefoot technically is the most efficient way you can run, unless you introduce something that doesn't rob you of energy. A regular running shoe made of ethylene vinyl acetate foam, EVA foam, which every running shoe is, dissipates energy quite effectively. Is anyone running the Nike Lunar Light foam? Lunar Racer? Oh good, you guys haven't been subjected to, you have? Okay. Bright kind of fluorescent green, like they glow green, like that lovely shirt back there. Okay, if you see a shoe with a midsole that looks like that made by Nike, it's probably Lunar Light. Lunar Light foam is so soft that people sand it and they go, ooh, that's really nice on my foot. But unfortunately, nice and soft is not good, because soft allows your foot to collapse where you put the most pressure. Exactly what you don't want for an efficient shoe. If you start collapsing, most people roll, they put a little more pressure on the inside of their foot. That's why you have a big bone. Big toe's big because it supports more pressure. So most people load it up a little more than on the outside, which is that little toe. And consequently, if you have something very, very soft on your foot, under your foot, you just kind of collapse into it. And then if everything's rigid, it's not, but if everything's rigid and you move 1 millimeter at your foot on the side, your knee is trying to move 10 millimeters laterally, trying to. It doesn't, because you have connective tissue around the knee joint, but that lateral movement is painful. And the knee is a stable joint, meaning that it only wants to move one way. A mobile joint like the ankle moves in all directions. So you can kind of adapt to some of that at the ankle, but it's still not going to help your knee. So any of these lateral rotational forces are not good for your structure and joints. Another study out of the Gait Lab at West Virginia showed that if you wear a big shoe in your heel strike, you'll increase rotational forces by up to 80%. Whether or not that hurts you doesn't really matter, but those lateral rotational forces are also inefficiencies, so you just run slower. Here's another effect of the shoe. So you can see that with a big shoe, you start to put weight at one point, and then it's going to start to cause a hole or a crater. And that crater, you'll start to fall in the crater you build, and then of course you'll increase those rotational forces. But something else happens is that EVA foam starts out as closed cell foam. So those little bubbles in the foam contain the air, at least before you put weight on them. But as soon as you put weight on them, it's not very much weight, they start to burst and join into adjacent bubbles, and then you get bigger bubbles. And eventually, although it looks like foam, if you look at it under a microscope, you'll see that all these little bubbles are joined together, and you have effectively a dish sponge under your foot. And if you actually get a shoe like this, you can press it with your fingers, and there's nothing there. It's just an appearance of foam. So for someone like this, the gradient on the shoe increases, so they start to impact the toe joints into the ground, and they effectively have no cushioning. And they've caused a slope inside of the shoe. So when you have a slope inside of the shoe, a sideways slope, which is almost inevitably what happens, it's like running down a road camber. You know, run down the side of the road to avoid traffic, and you've always got the road sloping one way, and you run down and you've got one leg hard than the other. This is exactly what happens when you start to destroy a shoe. So for most shoes, you'll start to feel that they lose their resilience, but they also quite often start to tweak you a little bit. And that's why. It's very simple. A good shoe, on the other hand, won't take a permanent set. It won't collapse in any way or the other. And it's always going to maintain its integrity. So it'll also have an upper that allows your foot to expand. Do you mind if I borrow your shoe for a second? Don't know what shoe this is, A6 something or other. But you can see right around the side of the shoe here, where your metatarsal heads are, it's quite built up. There's a lot of reinforcement around here. And that prevents your foot from spreading. Unfortunately, under load, a foot on a firm surface generally wants to spread about 15%. So you should have the ability for the shoe to spread 15%. There's a few good shoes around, but if it's got some big panel on the side with flexibility that allows your foot to spread, that's good. That allows, or enough room in the toe box. So you need enough room, or loose laces, which is why like Yanks and things like that are quite good, because they allow that spread to happen to some extent. So you need lacing and or the shoe's ability to spread to allow your foot to function naturally. And if you don't allow the foot to function, well, if you do allow the foot to function naturally, you'll have a foot that looks like this. Fairly rare, you've probably never seen one unless you've gone to Fiji or somewhere. But this is a natural foot, and it's always wider at the ends of the toes. That's the widest point of an unencumbered foot, a foot that's never worn a shoe. Also, generally, they're volumetrically thicker because they're big, strong feet. If you put a foot inside a shoe, you'll see something a little different. So you can see clearly that the shoe is changing the direction of the toes just by bending the joints inward. I'll guarantee if you look at your own foot, it probably looks a little more like this. This is a pretty standard Western foot. And unfortunately, when you take the shoe off, the foot still typically takes the shape of the shoe. This foot was from quite a fast age group runner in the United States. And running fast, but also had horrible late-stage overpronation problems, because the toe would normally be out here with a straight joint, and without this support, then your foot will tend to crash inward, which causes overpronation, late-stage overpronation. Now, overpronation is something that, again, has been coined by the shoe industry. Thank you. A little hard to see, the shoe's a little bit dirty, but a stability shoe is generally built with a very large heel, big thick heel here, in the forefoot, and then they put what's called posting in. So they build much thicker, more dense material on the inside of the shoe, but the posting is starting back here at the heel. If you remove the heel, and you're not starting pronation back here, but you have that natural pronation which you saw with the barefoot run and the foot rolling in, it actually starts here and ends up over here. So where you really need the posting, is up here, not back here. So pretty much every traditional shoe built with stability completely ignores the fact that it should really be in the forefoot. In fact, every shoe is a neutral shoe if you remove the heel. If you introduce it from the heel, so you put a big heel on, you start the pronation back here, it can be quite useful to help support what you just created, but you created it, so why have it? Something else that you'll see with these shoes is that, don't want to pick on ASICs, just happen to be right there. They understand that you're going to engage the heel in the lateral aspect, but what do? They understand that they've created this engaging with the ground, and then all this very, very soft gel removes it again. So they put the heel on, but then try and remove the fact that it's there at all. You see that with a lot of shoes. It's also a bit of a paradox, since I'm on the shoe thing. You start to see a lot of good minimalist shoes coming out. New Balance, Minimalist line is a good example. Merrell is another one. Let's examine New Balance for a minute. Every New Balance shoe built today, except for the Minimalist line, where there's 2 models, 4 shoes, is a big heeled shoe, and this is a racing flat. It's a big heeled shoe with a lot of control. And so they're saying you need this big heel with a lot of control. But we think we're also going to build this line of shoes that is just a minimalist shoe, which you don't need a heel and you don't need control. So it's a paradox. What's the real truth? I think there are almost every shoe company knows from the inside what's good. The trick is how do they introduce a shoe that is healthy for foot function and not say, oh, we've been wrong for 30 years, now we're going to build this. 10 minutes? Right. Just in case you doubt the fact that shoes could affect your feet, this is a Chinese lotus foot, quite popular about 100 years ago, so they were binding women's feet to make them look small. And if you take the shoes off, unfortunately, it still looks like the shoe. So, natural running points, and we'll talk a little about speed in a second. Natural running points, very simple. Wear a level shoe. That'll make things really easy, or go barefoot, one of the two. Need to run with good body alignment. So any bad posture, which is easy to do because we tend to sit at a computer all day or drive a car, just stand nice and tall and straight. Key to speed is lean. So you'll see a sprinter is way forward. Someone running quite fast will be still fairly well forward. And if you're running fairly slow, you're going to be quite upright. If you want to run backwards, you just have to lean backwards. So it's all about lean, just like an accelerator pedal. Try not to land with your foot in front of your center of mass, that's going to slow you down. So land with your foot somewhere under your center of mass or close to. Doesn't really matter where you land on your foot. You can land your heel, you could land on your forefoot. Tends to be easier to land on the outside of your forefoot, and most of you will be running a little quicker, so you're probably feeling the ground. Might be a little ahead of you, but you're feeling the ground, so it's the proprioceptive part of the strike. You'll feel the ground somewhere. It might even be the heel a little bit, but then you're really loading under your center of mass. If you load in front, not so good. If you load under your center of mass, that's great. Loading the heel is important. That's the elastic recoil. So allow your heel to settle fully. Don't try and keep your heel off the ground. And then as you move forward, you'll naturally lever your foot forward. Lift your foot off the ground. Now here's a key. If you can run at about 180 footsteps per minute, that's both feet, you'll be fairly efficient. And one of the main reasons is that you're minimizing vertical oscillation. You're spending 75% of your effort just supporting your body weight. And if you start to run with very long, slow strides, you'll have a lot of vertical motion and you spend a lot more effort just going up and down. And if you run with really, really, really small strides, you minimize this movement and you minimize effort and you have more energy to move you forward. So about 180 steps per minute, just like cycling, about 180. Secondarily, when the muscle moves in the muscle sheath, it assists venous return, so you kind of help yourself with the muscles moving inside the muscle sheath. Minimize lateral movement. For speed, you always want to minimize the things that don't help you go forward. So vertical oscillation is one. Lateral movements are another one. A lot of people don't even think about their arms, and yet you'll see them, they've got a chicken wing out here, and they've got this chicken wing going on. If you watch the counterbalancing body part, which is the foot, they've probably got a chicken leg. And you'll see this all the time. You can try it actually. We're going to do two things. So go ahead and stand up. One is stability. First of all, let's do chicken leg. So stand on one leg. You might need a little space to do this. Stand on one leg and then get an arm if you can and swing it around. And to keep your body straight, without rotating your body, you have to kick your leg against it. You have to kick your leg. If you don't, then your whole body moves. So this is your counterbalance. Anytime your arm is out to the side, you have to counterbalance it with something. It's going to be your leg. So try and avoid keeping your arm out to the side. Also try and avoid crossing your center line with your arm, or arms, or legs for that matter. Try and avoid crossing your center line. So if you find yourself swinging your arms like this, your body is going to counterbalance it, and you're going to be sending a lot of energy down the road this way. Let's go ahead and stand on one foot. This will be easiest barefoot, but you can do it without a shoe. Okay, fairly easy, just nice and neutral. Stand on one foot. Slightly flex your knee a little bit, that'll help. Okay, no one's having problems. What about if you roll and weight up your forefoot, so you're standing on the ball of your foot? You can still do it, it's a little harder. What are your toes doing?
A lot of pressure.
Yeah, you're moving, you're gripping the ground. Okay, now go back flat again. So everyone could pretty much do that. Neutral's a little easier. Now you're on a tripod, now you've got a heel on your forefoot. Now go ahead and try and balance on your heel. What do you have to do to balance on your heel? You're moving your legs and arms around because you have nothing on the ground to balance you. This is instability. If you land and engage the ground with your heel, it's a very, very unstable ball. It's like trying to stand on a soccer ball. Very difficult, possible, but very difficult. If you've ever twisted your ankle, it's probably why. Probably came down that unstable ball and then just rolled off it. If you come down on your forefoot with all that stability, and you have 26 bones, 33 joints, and 12 tendons in your forefoot, and that allows you the articulation and movement, and you have 25% of all of the nerve endings in your entire body are in your forefeet. The reason for that, and all that articulation, because it allows you stability. It allows you stability. Why do you suppose you're ticklish on your feet? Because you have so many nerve endings. Very simple. What about you? Does anyone ever tickle you on the heel? It never happens. You can't. Nothing there. You don't feel it. All right, you can sit down again. Got any questions? We're kind of through time here, but I'm happy to take questions as long as you ask. Yeah?
If you're going to go into barefoot running or go with those trainers, is that a good exercise to do to strengthen the calf muscles or Achilles? Because when you go into barefoot running, that's the problems people have, right?
Yeah, the question was, if you're going to go to barefoot running or minimal running, is it good to strengthen the calf and Achilles? Absolutely yes. Probably the easiest way to do it is by doing it running. So if you make any adaptive change, and it could be anything, running being a good example, but if you go and climb Mount Everest, you probably wouldn't walk to the top the first day because you'd die. Why? Because you haven't adapted to the altitude. Same with heat. You can run in 50 degrees, but it takes a few weeks to adapt. Same with running. If you adapt or want to adapt to a barefoot running gait, you're going to lower your heel down. You're probably going to have to lengthen the muscle and tendon in the back of your leg, because walking, even a dress shoe, even this boot right here, pretty much everything has a heel on it. So we're used to having our heel up anything from 12 millimeters and up, and lowering back down again, especially in a dynamic situation where it's kind of like dynamic stretching. It is dynamic stretching. If you don't lengthen that stuff out, you will get very, very sore calf and Achilles very, very fast. It actually takes about 12 weeks to lengthen and adapt soft tissue. A little bit like injury. You can be fully recovered and back to full strength after about 12 weeks. So a good rule of thumb that is totally dependent on your running gait style and flexibility and physiology is take at least 12 weeks to adapt. So from 0 to whatever you want to run, and distance will matter. You're probably not going to run barefoot in a marathon tomorrow. if you decide to start running barefoot or minimalist. And for some people, it could take a year or more. But it does depend. The key is to take it gradually, and if you feel bad pain or overstress, then just back off a little bit. We kind of know that from training, it's intuitive, but of course we're also driven. Being triathletes, we're always driven to do more, and that's where we get into trouble.